Good evening. I'm going to read a story. The New Citizen, a Dystopian Christmas Tale by John Lacken. Elizabeth awoke in the hospital for the health and well-being of future citizens with a deep sense of inner contentment. She had always thought the name of the hospital was strange. It was here that her friend had aborted her first two pregnancies after government officials advised her that current climate restrictions and health regulations had determined that the time was not right for a citizen of the Global Happiness Initiative. The initiative was the ruling body which had been set up after the first appearance of COVID. That was the year COVID-19, and now, in this year COVID-33, Elizabeth and her significant other citizen, Zach, after a careful screening process, had finally been granted permission to bring a new citizen into the Global Happiness Initiative. It was now 3 days since Elizabeth had given birth. The Equality Ministry had not yet decided on the gender of this new citizen, but Elizabeth secretly hoped for what was known in the years before COVID as a little boy. She had never voiced this secret desire out loud for fear of repercussions from the Ministry for New Citizens. The years of rigorous new citizens training that she and Zach had undergone had taught her to keep certain things to herself. Otherwise, she would never have been accepted into the programme for the development of new citizens, which was regulated by the Ministry. It was this government department that determined which citizens were suitable for bringing new citizens into the initiative. She often thought it funny that despite years and years of medical and scientific advancement, the best citizens were still being produced by the physical union of what were once known as a male and a female. She had not been privileged to see the new citizen yet, but soon, she would get to hold this precious child. Meanwhile, down in the welcome neo-citizens ward of the hospital, Nurse Mary was busy preparing the new citizen to be united with his future citizen carers. She was glad that this new little citizen had passed all of the required screening tests, as she always found it difficult when a new citizen failed one of the tests and had to be disposed of. It was hard to take the emotional trauma that sometimes occurred when citizen carers had to be informed that their new citizen had not passed the tests and that they should apply again for acceptance onto the programme in another 2 years. Some citizen carers never fully recovered from the psychological impact of this and were subsequently deemed unfit members of the programme for the development of new citizens. They were dismissed from the programme after being sterilised. But today was a good day for Nurse Mary. She was making the final preparations for the new citizen, who had been assigned the gender male, identifying as male with the pronouns he, him. She often wondered what criteria were used by the government in assigning the gender to the new citizen, but this had always been classified information. She was now ready to perform the final step before taking the new citizen to be introduced to his future citizen carers, who would make sure that this little citizen would learn to think according to the standard COVID doctrines that had been passed by the different government ministries over the years. Nurse Mary always felt a tinge of sadness as she made the final preparation for the new citizen. She hated, although emotions like hate and love had been banned for years, when the time came to put the face mask on the new little citizen. She had to be careful that she was not observed looking longingly into the little citizen's beautiful face for the last time, absorbing every little detail. Any outward sign of emotion or resistance could cost her her job, and then she would never have the privilege of looking at these beautiful little faces again. She whispered a soft goodbye to the little boy, whose face she believed she would never see again, and carefully placed the mask, making sure that it was covering the nose and mouth and was tucked snugly under the new citizen's chin. He was just 3 days old. She would have kissed this little boy were it not for the ever-present security cameras which monitored her every movement. she was finding it more and more difficult to part with each new citizen she prepared, and she wondered for how long more she would be able to keep up the pretense, despite the repugnance she felt deep within her heart. She dismissed these morbid thoughts by thinking about the name the citizen carers would give to this little fellow. It was one of the few freedoms still permitted to citizen carers. They still got to name their new little citizen, with final approval of the name being reserved to the government, of course. Elizabeth, fully dressed now, and awaiting her release from the hospital for the health and well-being of future citizens, tensed with excitement as she saw the door of her hospital room opening and Nurse Mary wheel the cradle with the new citizen into the room. Elizabeth had taken extra care to ensure that her face mask was placed correctly according to the latest COVID-33 regulations. She made sure not to touch it again once in place, and with carefully sanitized hands she had signed the COVID-33 declaration, stating that she would carefully educate this new citizen according to current and future COVID regulations. She knew that she could be expelled from the program for the development of new citizens for any serious breach of the regulations. In this case, the new little citizen would be given over to other citizen carers. She was determined that this would not happen to her. One of her best friends had applied for and had been granted permission to voluntarily terminate her own life after her little citizen had been removed from her, when someone reported her for not having her mask on correctly whilst in the presence of her little citizen. Elizabeth still missed this friend and had not found any comfort in the Ministry for Health's assurances that her friend had made a responsible decision for the good of the Global Happiness Initiative, and that some of her organs had been donated to save the lives of other citizens. Elizabeth and Zack signed the forms handed to them by Nurse Mary. The new citizen was wrapped snugly in the little cradle on wheels, and Elizabeth's heart was beating faster than she had ever known before, because very soon she would get to hold her masked little citizen. Nurse Mary addressed the new citizen carers. "What name do you wish to give this new citizen?" A male, who identifies as male, with the pronouns he, him. Elizabeth replied in a voice which surprised her for its calmness. "His name is John." Nurse Mary turned to the male citizen carer, known on her form as Carer A, to confirm the name. Zack replied, "His name is John." "Thank you," said Nurse Mary. "Just let me upload that to the citizen database for approval. It'll only take a minute." A minute later, the screen on Nurse Mary's tablet device flashed green, and the word "approved" lit up the screen. She turned to the cradle and carefully lifted John out and handed him to Elizabeth. Elizabeth's heart and world stood still for several moments. She carefully handed the little bundle to Zack, who placed Citizen John into his sanitized travel cot, and after a few final formalities, Elizabeth, Zack, and John headed home. It was late in the evening of December the 24th, in the year COVID-45. John, now 12 years old, was outside as the sky slowly darkened and the stars began to peep. He was warm in his thermal coat and was eagerly looking forward to his planned adventure. About 2 years ago, Zack had begun taking John out at night to teach him about the stars and galaxies in the night sky. John was fascinated by the stars, but more than that, he loved when his father, or citizen carer A as he was supposed to address him, would tell him about the old times. Zack spoke to him of a time when there were churches and priests. He told him about a mystical man called Jesus, and of how he had come to bring freedom to men. John loved these night adventures and stories, especially when his mother Elizabeth would join them. His parents warned him that these things were never to be spoken of in the house or when others were present. But Zack had told him that one day he too would be free. When? John asked. Zack assured him that he would know the time and to follow the inspirations of his heart. A few nights previously, John had noticed a bright new star shining in the east. The star somehow seemed to beckon to him, as if it wanted him to follow it and to go to the place where its shining rays seemed to touch the earth. This evening, the pull of the star had become irresistible, and John, remembering his father's words about following his heart, without a word to anyone, had decided to follow it. He made sure not to bring any devices so that his movements would not be tracked. Once all was quiet, John set off at a brisk pace, travelling across the open fields. Eventually he came to a fence beyond which lay the restricted zone. 3 days ago, while he was exploring the area, he had come across a gap in the fence which allowed him to squeeze through. He had heard the rumours about the strange, savage people who reportedly lived out here, known disparagingly to some as the Catholics. They were said to have some strange beliefs which were quite popular in the years before COVID, BC, but which had been suppressed by the Ministry for Truth. John had never met any of these people, and he was not sure he believed that they really existed. Perhaps these were the people from the stories his father used to tell him on their stargazing nights. Perhaps it was a rumour put out by the Ministry for Truth to dissuade children from venturing into the restricted zones. This thought caused John to smile behind his ever-present face mask. The Ministry for Truth lying to children to make them obedient. The irony of it appealed to his sense of humour. But tonight he was on an adventure, and who knows, perhaps he would learn the real truth. He had been travelling for about 2 miles into the restricted zone when he noticed a growing brightness coming from one of the rays that shone forth from the new star. In the distance, he began to make out the shape of a low building which was lit up by the star, and he directed his footsteps towards it. As he drew nearer, he was careful not to make a sound. There was a door in the building, and it was open. The soft light, as of a candle, created a warm, inviting glow within. He could hear the voice of a woman singing, and, crouching low, he crept ever closer until he could see within the room. He was astonished at what he saw. The woman was older than anyone he had ever seen before. There were no old people in John's world, but that was not all. This woman's face was uncovered. She was not wearing her face mask. In his astonishment, John found himself staring at her. Suddenly, he realized that she was looking directly at him. Her face was kindly, and she beckoned to him. Now, feeling a little foolish, John stood up and approached the door. "You're very welcome to Bethlehem, John," said the woman, in a voice that was warm, gentle, and inviting. "Won't you come in? We've been expecting you." John noticed the way her lips moved as she spoke. He had never seen his carers' faces uncovered apart from mealtimes, and the Ministry for New Citizens discouraged talking whilst eating. He wondered how she had known his name. John cautiously entered the room and felt the warmth coming from an open fireplace where wood logs crackled in the grate. "Who are you? How do you know me? Is this where you live?" The questions tumbled from John's lips as more formed in his mind. The old woman put a finger to her lips for John to be quiet and told him to remove his face mask. "Those are not necessary here," she said. "We are a free people." The woman introduced herself as Anna and said, "There is someone I would like you to meet. She has not seen you for quite some time." She drew back a heavy curtain that covered the entrance to another warmly lit room. John entered and saw another woman cradling a newborn infant. There were 4 other children with her who all looked up as John entered. "This is my daughter Mary," said Anna. "She used to work at the hospital for the health and well-being of future citizens, and she was the midwife when you were born. She looked after you during your first 3 days of life. She left that job shortly after you went home." Mary smiled a beautiful smile at John. John heard another noise now, the sound of a horse arriving outside. Someone else was coming to visit. He looked around to see a tall man, dressed completely in black, stoop slightly as he entered the house. "Hello there, John," he said when he beheld the young boy. "So you've finally come to pay us a visit on this special night of nights. I am Father Pius, and we will soon celebrate the dawn Christmas Mass to welcome the birth of our Saviour, Jesus Christ. We will also baptize Mary's new baby." John's mind was racing. The stories were all true. The Catholics still lived. But John was in for another big surprise. Moments later, the door of Bethlehem opened again, and Elizabeth and Zach entered the room. John ran to the arms of his mother, and he felt her warm tears wet his cheeks as she embraced him and kissed him for the first time without their face masks. Later that night, as John lay in his bed pondering all the wonderful things he had seen and been told this day, his thoughts returned to the wonderful ceremony he had witnessed. He remembered the words of Father Pius as he began the Holy Mass, "Introibo ad altare Dei," I will go in to the altar of God. He remembered the wonderful smell of incense, the sound of the bell ringing, the elevation of host and chalice, his parents, Elizabeth and Zach, who had been baptized Catholic only recently, kneeling to receive the sacred host, which Father Pius placed carefully on their tongues. He smiled as he thought of the baptism of Elijah, Mary's fifth child, and he longed for the day of his own baptism. He knew now that he was called from all eternity to proclaim to all who would listen that Jesus Christ is the Saviour of men. As John drifted off to sleep, the words and melody of the chorus of the song they had all sung after Holy Mass had ended sounded in his heart. He knew that all was well with the world and that the peace of Jesus Christ had come to men of good will. Gloria in excelsis Deo, Gloria in excelsis Deo. Good night.